Let's start off with the early round busts, and I'll start off with our guest. So, Jagger, who do you want to talk about?
I want to talk about Kyren Williams, especially after I'd literally just got off a mock draft and been really diving into both Dynasty and Redraft ADP. Kyren Williams is just entirely too overvalued. And I know he had a season that's going to live near and dear to our hearts, especially us zero RB guys who took him late and whatnot. But the writing is on the wall. He's already dealing with a foot injury, which is pretty bad for a lot, at least I'm not saying long term, but at least for the season. We saw what happened to Travis Etienne, and I'm not like a Twitter doctor, so I don't know. But them drafting Blake Corum is obviously going to dip into his carries, and they've been very clear that they don't want to just run Kyren into the ground. So him being a low end RB1, depending on where you're drafting him at, is a little too rich for my blood, especially when you consider that Blake Corum is an objectively better prospect than Kyren was. So I think it's a lot of that Sean McVay cologne that we like from his production. So.
Where do you think he should be ranked? In our expert consensus rankings right now from across the industry, and this is in half PPR, by the way, he's RB7, and I agree that seems like that's just ripe to be a bust, given the injury stuff and the situation there. At the same time, and I actually said this on a show yesterday, outside of Christian McCaffrey, was there a running back that was more fun to have in your roster, in your starting lineup, when he was healthy, of course, last year than Kyren was? No, it was just, so it's I get why he's kind of a difficult guy to maybe come down on with a specific ranking. Like I said, he's RB7 in ECR. Where do you have him?
I have him as an RB23 almost.
Okay.
I think I almost have him pretty late. I just adjusted my rankings for Dynasty Redraft. I'm still working on him, but to me, he's an RB2 with upside. And when you think about a lot of the guys that you around his range that you just know are going to have actual roles, and you know how they're going to function within that offense. And moreover, there's this long-term stability because they either A, have the draft capital or have had more than one fluke season. I don't want to call it a fluke season. They've had one outlier season. Let's call it that way. I'm an anti-running back guy, period. Kyren Williams, I can't do it, man. I have zero Kyren shares, and I don't see it ever changing.
Erickson, I think you're also pretty below consensus on Kyren, right?
Yeah, I mean, not as low as our guest is. I have him more like the RB13 range, because I do have to acknowledge, okay, week one comes along, he's healthy. Where are you going to be ranking him in the week one rankings? He's going to be a top 5 running back. So you have to acknowledge that, hey, when to start the season before he gets hurt, before Blake Corum takes over, Kyren Williams is going to be productive until he's not. So I'm trying to kind of bake that into his ranking as a low end RB1, but yeah, it was the perfect storm for him last year. Everything that could have gone his way went his way. Even when he got hurt, the Rams had no one else to turn to, so they went right back to Kyren Williams. That may not happen again this time around because they have Blake Corum. So what if Kyren Williams starts the year with the job, plays really well, gets banged up again? Oh, Blake Corum comes in, smashes. Okay, well, Kyren, sorry, we're not going to give you the job again. We've seen Sean McVay run so hot and cold with running backs before. It's
Nope.
I loved this guy last year. Well, who do I love this year? Do I love Blake Corum? Do I love somebody else? And again, it's someone that's fallen victim to the Cam Akers thing more than one time. I just don't want, I'm afraid. I'm afraid to invest this much into a guy like Kyren Williams. And I think one thing I want to point out too, just about part of his production last year. So he actually faced the lowest rate of big size boxes or plus boxes with 8 men in the box defenders. So again, just going back to the snap share, no competition for touches in the backfield. He was set up so perfectly in this offense. It was just the perfect storm for Kyren. I just find it so hard to believe that he can run it back in 2024.
Yep.
I also wonder if maybe Stafford another year older. There have been discussions in recent, or rumors I should say, in recent seasons about, just his health and he doesn't strike me as the type of guy who's going to be like Tom Brady and play till he's 45, right? So not that he's going to retire this year, but another step closer to the end for Stafford. Maybe the offense takes a step back, in that sense. He was really good last year, so maybe that doesn't happen, but that could lead to fewer scoring opportunities as well.
Remember too, a lot of people were down on the Rams because their offensive line was bad. Matthew Stafford was injury prone. But then what happened this past year? Oh, everybody stayed healthy except Cooper Kupp. They were a really good offensive line that performed above expectation from what most people were projecting. And I think one thing too with Stafford's numbers last year for fantasy weren't elite, but it was his on-field play was really good. And when you look at how the Rams scored their touchdowns, they just scored a lot of rushing touchdowns. Matthew Stafford was 4th in the NFL in red zone pass attempts, but his final touchdown passing numbers do not reflect that whatsoever because it was Kyren Williams that was scoring all the touchdowns. We know touchdowns can be fluky year to year, so if Kyren then takes a step back in terms of how many touchdowns he's scoring and it's going through the air through Stafford's arm, then that's another, argument against Kyren Williams next year.
Yeah, and I think, Jagger, to your point, like at the point where you need to draft Kyren Williams to actually have him on your roster, I think it's very likely, like not even just that there will be other running backs I prefer, but that I'll just be more likely to say like, oh, I'll go for an early tight end, or oh, more likely than not, I'll want a wide receiver here. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and that's like a lot of it too. It's not just what the risk of what you're taking. It's what you're leaving on the board, especially when you look at the tiers of where like wide receivers go, especially in one QB. Like those high end pass catchers are pretty much gone after the 4th or 5th round, and then you're got a lot of hopefuls, or you're playing the streaming game, which no one likes to play with wide receiver. Running back and quarterback can get away with that. It's hard to do that with wide receiver. Then you think about the positional upside of tight ends. It's just Kyren Williams is just a crazy pick in my opinion.
Yeah, I think we're all pretty in lockstep there. Let's go to the next one here. Erickson, who is your first early round bust?
Going with Deebo Samuel, wide receiver for the San Francisco 49ers. It depends on what year it is when it comes to Deebo, because one year he's a wide receiver 1, and the other years he's like outside the top 36 because he's dealt with injuries. So I think that's something to kind of note with Deebo. He's a very physical player, and he gets banged up a lot because that's how he wins, is yards after the catch, playing physical. And what he did last year, very impressive, but he scored the second most fantasy points above expectation than any other wide receiver. So even though he was a fringe fantasy wide receiver 1, he was wide receiver 26 in terms of expected points per game. So just looking at how he's used in this 49ers offense with all of those other playmakers around him, like he's performing above expectation based on the amount of targets he's getting. Last year, he had the most red zone touches among any wide receiver. Him and Christian McCaffrey were basically gobbling up all the touchdown opportunities. Brandon Ayuk had fewer than 10 red zone targets. And this is after a year in 2022 where Brandon Ayuk actually led the 49ers in red zone targets. So the way that this offense is designed, it changes from year to year, how Kyle Shanahan likes to attack the red zone. So I'm expecting, if Deebo Samuel is back on the 49ers roster, that he's just not going to be able to scoring as many touchdowns as he did last year. Again, you're looking at the rushing production as well. That's something that's difficult to rely on year over year. He's another year older. Are they going to be wanting to bang him in between the tackles and taking him on jet sweeps? It's part of his game, but also increases his injury risk. And looking at the kind of reading the writing on the wall with Deebo Samuel and his future with the 49ers potentially. In the Super Bowl, he was awful. He caught 3 of 11 targets. He had a 30% target share. He had 33 yards. Now I know, again, he was dealing with a shoulder. It was either shoulder or collarbone injury. He may not have been 100%, but that's part of the Deebo Samuel package you're signing up for, a player that's going to have to play through injuries. And what have they done since the Super Bowl? Drafted 2 wide receivers, re-signed Juwan Jennings to an extension, and taken trade requests for Deebo Samuel. We don't even know if Deebo Samuel is going to be on the 49ers. If they trade him after June 1st, they can save $22 million against the salary cap. Now, I'm not out here projecting he's going to be traded onto a different team, but if he's on a different team, like that brings up more question marks about how effective Deebo Samuel is going to be at 28 years old as a player with a long injury track record. I just don't feel confident drafting him as a top 15 wide receiver for a lot of those reasons. And I'm just really high, particularly on Brandon Ayuk versus Deebo Samuel. I think this is the year where Ayuk really takes over. And I think that's going to come at the cost of Deebo Samuel taking a step back. So for me, I think that he's priced too high at wide receiver 15.
Yeah, I'm in lockstep with you on this one. Jagger, Erickson kind of asked, he already answered the question I was going to ask, which is if Deebo gets traded, like, do you like him more on the 49ers where there's so many other mouths to feed, but it's obviously, an offense that suits his skill set? Or if he gets traded, maybe he's higher up kind of on the pecking order, but it's a worse offense that doesn't utilize his unique talents as well. Which would you prefer to see Deebo in?
See, you answered my cop-out answer. I was going to say, it's like, it depends on where he goes. If he goes to another Shanahan or more Shanahan and less McVay system, I'm here for it. Because if you look at someone like, and he's not going to go here, obviously, because it'd be even more of a nightmare, like the Packers. Jaden Reed is their Deebo. If you look at these clone offenses, I see something for Deebo. But he's not the greatest route runner or anything like that. And he has to win in very specific ways. But, like, let's say if he goes to somewhere like, I'm a Pats fan. People are like, we want Deebo. And I'm like, I don't want Deebo because I don't know if we can use Deebo properly. So like, cool. I got this really expensive running back that's not very good at running back, but not very great at receiver. And like, he's a great athlete, but we can't use him. It just like, and this is why, especially in like Dynasty, other formats, I don't like keeping tweeners. Because it takes one thing to change their situation, and you got kind of a useless asset going forward. And I like I said to Andrew, you picked a player I routinely disliked and not drafted, even when I've looked kind of silly because he somehow keeps producing. But that's what happens when you're in the best offense in the NFL. So.
Yeah, I've turned down multiple trades like where somebody was offering me Deebo over the years because I'm very similar to you. He's just never a player that I'm like dying to have on my roster or that I'm very confident in long term, even though it has burned me in a couple of seasons. He's ranked in the consensus rankings as wide receiver 15. That feels too high to me. Where do you have him, Jagger?
I have him right at wide receiver 18, 19 because of the upside. And it's like, I'm pretty low on him. I think he's a wide receiver too. But what keeps me from putting him, like burying him even lower is because until he's not a 49er, I can't like sanely justify it. But it's one of those cases where I kind of talk out of both sides of my mouth where it's like, according to my rankings, yeah, he's a value, but I don't roster him, It's a perceived value type thing,
By the way, longtime listeners of the show will be happy to hear somebody actually use that phrase correctly. Erickson likes to say he's talking out of his mouth, which
I think I brought that expression up on every single show I've been on this week when you corrected me on it last week.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to have somebody who actually knows how to speak out of their mouth here. Jagger, let's go to you for your next early round bust here.
It's Davante Adams, and I feel like I personally attack people because I'm throwing stones at our heroes, and it's not Davante Adams the player; it's that he is a Raider. I went on a show and we used corporate superlatives to describe players and teams, and Raiders have a fast, fun-paced working environment. They are the tech startup where we got this new guy with a lot of energy. Everyone's happy. We're super excited, but I don't know if anyone knows how to run this company. I don't know, man. Like, what about Luke Getsy that said, you know what? Bring him over here. Give me some Luke Getsy. And he's like, I'm going to get him as quarterback. You know who it is? Gardner Minshew. So when you look at Davante Adams' points per game, it has fallen off since he has left the Packers. And I don't think that is indicative of so much him as like a player in, his age, even though he's 31, and more that, hey, man, maybe Jimmy Garoppolo is just not as good as Aaron Rodgers. And again, Gardner Minshew had a great year with the Colts, but I don't think we give Shane Steichen enough credit for what he did to that offense. Like, we're going to eliminate one side of the field, and you're going to hyper focus on Michael Pittman. That's all you need to look at is Michael Pittman. And then when you're not focused there, you're going to hand it to two of our running backs. And essentially, I guess that's what the Raiders are going to do, but I don't trust Luke Getsy to do it as well as Shane Steichen has done it. Like, this feels a lot of wishful thinking and a lot of good vibes. Like, we're running on good vibes, and I'm waiting for the wheels to kind of fall off the Raiders train. And I don't mean that because they're fun to watch. And you want to talk about like just fun, enjoyable football. I'm rooting for this Raiders team, but not from my roster.
Erickson, where do you have Davante Adams ranked? I feel like he's not somebody that has gotten actually a lot of discussion on our shows throughout the offseason, at least not the ones that I've been on. But, I mean, you think of him as like one of the superstar wide receivers in the NFL. Like, even his down year last year was pretty good. Obviously, like the major questions at quarterback that Jagger brought up. But I just feel like we haven't really discussed him that much. Where do you have him ranked?
I have him wide receiver 12, and I think it's more about his just overall body of work. And I don't see him falling outside the top 20 receivers. Like, I think you're going to draft him as like a wide receiver 2, and I think that he's probably going to be a wide receiver 2 because what has he shown that would prove otherwise? Like, even last year, he had Jimmy Garoppolo for a handful of games, Aiden O'Connell as a rookie 4th-round pick, and he still delivered because he got 175 targets in the offense last year. So I don't see a scenario where, okay, if Gardner Minshew is the quarterback, yeah, like he hyper-targeted Michael Pittman last year. What's he going to do this year? Probably hyper-target Davante Adams. So I think that he does come with a floor where he's getting so much volume in the offense that you have to kind of rank him potentially in this range. But is it an upside play? Like, probably not. because, again, you have question marks about the quarterback play. You'd have question marks about Luke Getsy. How is he going to make this all work together? I mean, we gave him one of the most athletic and exciting quarterbacks last year in Justin Fields, and it wasn't fun. It was not a fun ride. So what are we expecting this year? It's like Davante could end up in a scenario where he gets his way out of Las Vegas altogether. Like if he's like, I'm fed up, like I want to win, like, because that's when he went there originally, was to win with Derek Carr, and then I don't know really what he was thinking, but that's ended up happening when he went to the Raiders. So again, he just plays so much, and he just commands such a high amount of targets in that offense. It's like you see where he does offer a floor, but I guess you're hoping that he can kind of turn into like a Mike Evans-esque type of season where he kind of shocks everybody, be like, oh, well, he's just that good. He's a little bit older than Mike Evans. He's 31, and he's definitely not going as late as Mike Evans was last year. So I think those are some concerns about Davante. And, looking at him in my ranking at wide receiver 12, it really is probably more about the name brand than necessarily projecting him with this offense.
What if I told you he never got more than 12 points per game all last season? Like not points per game. He never eclipsed 13 points, fantasy points at PPR. That's just what scares me. When we talk about a 32-year-old wide receiver, it just like all the things that you said. Again, talking out of both sides of our mouths as we keep that joke rolling. It's like all the things you're saying are right, but it's like and again, I'm a dynasty guy, so it could be dynasty brain on here. It's like I don't even see Davante Adams on the draft board. I'm like 31. You want me to pay for him at the turn? Bye.
All right, Erickson, one more early round bust. Who you got?
I know you're going to love this one, Worm. I'm going to go with Derrick Henry. And it's funny because we talked about Derrick Henry on the last show we did with the bold takes. Debro and Joe are all over Derrick Henry, and I'm just kind of sitting in the background, like biting my lip, because I was like, I don't like Derrick Henry as much as everybody else, but I don't have a chance to talk about it, so I'm going to talk about it now. So for me, when I look at running backs that tend to bust year over year, a lot of it is about projected volume and projected role in their offense. When you talk about Derrick Henry, and the guys highlighted this on the show that we did earlier this week, it's the touchdown potential, right? Oh, he's playing on the Ravens. Oh, he's going to score so many touchdowns. Oh, Gus Edwards scored 13 touchdowns last year. Worm, what was Gus Edwards in points per game and overall in fantasy scoring last year?
I don't know. I don't have it memorized.
Well, he was RB 32 in points per game.
Okay.
He scored 13 rushing touchdowns, and he was RB 19 overall. He posted a 25% bust rate using the FantasyPros Boomer Bust tool. That was second highest among running backs inside the top 20. You know what the highest bust rate last year among running backs that finished inside the top 20? It was Derrick Henry at 31%. So for me, this is just a lot of projection on a running back that, hey, he's just going to score double-digit touchdowns and that's all that matters. Well, he's not going to catch passes. Okay, that we care about that. Half PPR, full PPR. Derrick Henry doesn't catch passes. He's playing an offense that no matter how much they talk up, we're going to involve the running backs in the passing game. It never happens. And it's not going to happen with Lamar Jackson. I know we can agree on that, Worm, even if we disagree on Derrick Henry. And then when you look at Todd Monken coming in, and even the Ravens historically have always used a running back by committee, a thunder and lightning approach. How many touches is Derrick Henry actually going to get in this offense? And I want to point to a quote that Monken talked about where, I would love to give, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, I would love to give Derrick Henry 300 carries because that means we're winning a lot of games. So what is that saying to the people that are listening? It's saying that, okay, when we're winning games, that's what we're going to feed Derrick Henry. The Ravens have one of the hardest schedules in the NFL. Derrick Henry is a game script dependent running back that you now have to take as a top 10 running back. I don't have to worry about game script when I'm taking a running back that I'm starting every single week because that's going to make him super boom or bust. What if he doesn't score 1 week? Then he's not going to do anything in your lineup. He's going to get 40 rushing yards. Great. 4 points. Nothing. Yes, he's going to have some monster games, but week 1 against the Chiefs. Okay, let's say they open up behind. Is Derrick Henry going to be on the field? Probably not. So I get the upside case with the touchdowns, but that's it. Like, that's all you're banking on. So why would I draft Derrick Henry where he's going when I could draft Joe Mixon? He's an older running back. He plays on a good offense. He should be the goal line back. He also catches passes, and he also goes way later than Derrick Henry does. So I just don't think there's enough separating Derrick Henry just with the touchdown upside alone to be, he's clearly going to be a top 10 running back this year. I'm going to draft him at the end of round 2, at the beginning of round 3. So that's kind of why I'm not into Derrick Henry.
Well, So here's what I would say. Number one is, yes, he might be going as a top 10 running back, but it's like the back half of the third in drafts that I've seen. Like, that's not that heavy of a price to pay. I don't think for a guy who I don't think you can just kind of throw aside the touchdown, like the likelihood of him getting double-digit touchdowns, and not just double-digit touchdowns, but like, again, if Derrick Henry is healthy, I've said it 1,000 times. The Ravens do not want to run with Lamar up close to the goal line. They want to run with the running back. That's why Gus Edwards scored a dozen touchdowns, and Derrick Henry is better than Gus Edwards. Like, if he is healthy, I do not see a world where he scores under a dozen touchdowns. And if anything, I think it'll be closer to like 15 or more. Like, he is going to score a lot of touchdowns if he is healthy, which he's a 30-year-old running back. Maybe he's not healthy. That's an entirely different sort of red flag to be worried about. The other thing is, like, I'm not worried about game script at all. I know the schedule is hard. They have faced difficult schedules in previous years as well. And Lamar, in the Lamar era, when Lamar is on the field, they've gotten blown out like 4 times in his career. Like, the games he loses, they are typically still close. It happens every now and then because that happens with every team. But I don't think game script is going to be an issue. I think they're either going to be winning a lot of games because the defense is still really good. They still have the reigning MVP at quarterback. Like, this is still a quality team. And even if they take a step back a little, they were so good last year that even if they're merely a good team who's just in a lot of close games, I think they're going to want to use Derrick Henry. I think they're going to learn from the lesson from the AFC Championship game where they didn't run enough. And I think they've heard that all offseason and are going to want to lean on this big superstar running back that was their big offseason addition. So I'm not worried about game script and that kind of usage, and I'm very confident in the touchdowns. The only concern for me is, it's a 30-year-old running back, and like philosophically, that's hard to say. I'm gonna go out and be aggressive in adding somebody like that. I think Derrick Henry's an outlier, and I think that he's going to check all the boxes that we expect him to check this year, assuming he's on the field. Is that a fair rebuttal, or do you think that's not? Am I being a homer here because I'm a Ravens fan? What do you think, Erickson?
No, I think it's a fair rebuttal. I just am not as optimistic or with the red zone thing, right? We're projecting here. And just historically speaking, when you look at running backs that bust, it's because we overproject what their red zone role is going to be. What if he does what Tony Pollard did? Like, Tony Pollard got all the red zone touches in the world. They didn't score, and that's why he was a bust. Like, I'm looking at where's Derrick Henry's floor, right? Like, he has to score touchdowns. What if he doesn't score the touchdowns? Well, then he's going to be a bust.
Well, sure, but you're saying, like, okay, what if he does what this running back who's not as good as Derrick Henry does? Like, I think Derrick Henry's better than Tony Pollard. Jagger, I want to hear what you have to say.
I mean, you nailed all the things. Like, basically all of the things that Andrew said. Here's my argument. What if Derrick Henry isn't a human? Like, I know that's crazy to say on here, but like Derrick Henry and Mike Evans, I've thrown everything away from my process with these guys. These guys are just hyper athletes, and that's why I'm willing to pull the trigger. I don't go out of my way to get Derrick Henry because it's the age thing for me. And to kind of prove Andrew's point, the more that I think about it, because like I get Derrick Henry, and I don't tell anyone else not to draft him, but I don't draft him because we saw the decline last year. Once you see it, it's fast with running backs. Tajay Spears was an objectively better running back than Derrick Henry was, but he is going into an objectively better offense. So when you want to talk about, like, I think Derrick Henry's the riskiest player on here, and I think because of his upside, he is he's worth the risk. So, and to give, like, again, like, I know I'm kind of like proving both your points, but I'm leaning with Ryan here because, again, I like the upside. And to kind of finish with one point that helps out his argument, the Ravens have always had a tough schedule because they're in the AFC North. They're just like, when I tell everyone, like, well, they have one of the toughest schedule, I'm like, yeah, they have a tough division. They play hard people twice a year. That's like, I don't even look at that because I just know that, okay, for like at least 6 games out of the year, you're going to be struggling. I'm looking at you, AFC North, NFC West, a lot of those conferences like that. So it doesn't really bother me. And they build those teams to win in those conferences, like he said. So I get the risk. It's hard for me to say don't draft Derrick Henry until I see it because I've been doing it for 4 years and I've looked silly. So.
Well, one other
before we get off Derrick. So again, I'll change the narrative here with, so Derrick Henry in round 3, and I brought up his name before, Joe Mixon at the end of round 5. Like, wouldn't you say they both have a lot of touchdown upside in their respective offenses? I would say that. But
prove you right.
Joe
I'd go
Mixon
Joe
catches-
Mixon. Yeah, I would wait on
That's kind
Joe
of like
Mixon.
another point I'm trying to make here is the price with Derrick Henry, because when Derrick Henry first signed with the Ravens, I was really excited. And I was expecting more people to come forward and be like, oh, well, he's old, I don't want him. And I was like, sick, I'm going to be able to get Derrick Henry in like round 5. But then that ended up not being the case. And that's why I've soured on him a little bit because of the price tag. Whereas I look at Joe Mixon and I'm like, is there really a big difference here? Like, they're both older running backs, they're both on new teams, like, and they both play on good offenses, except Mixon is cheaper and catches passes. So like, that's kind of my argument back. It's like, is Joe Mixon a better value? Like, what say you, Worm, when I bring up Mixon as a comparable player?
I mean, probably a better value, but like at a certain point, you just have to take a player that you think is going to be good. Like, okay, Mixon in round 5 is better than Henry in round 3. Well, there's probably some other running back in round 8 that's better than Mixon in round 5. Like, at a certain point, you need to actually like click draft and take these guys.
Yeah.
And Henry's a guy that I'm happy to take. The other thing I will say quickly is Lamar has dropped a lot of weight this offseason. Most of his rushing yards last year came from scrambling, not design runs. I think when they're not in close near the goal line where they're going to run with Henry, I think they want to do some more designed run stuff with Lamar as he gets back some of that speed, which I think is just going to open up more holes. Like defenders are going to have to freeze to see if Lamar's keeping the ball or not, and then Derrick Henry's going to roll him over. Like, I think it's going to be really fun to watch, and I'm excited for Henry.